Before the world was divided by walls and wars, there existed an age where the sky belonged to dragons and the earth trembled beneath their shadow. This was not a time of legend whispered around warm fires. This was reality, raw and merciless. Humans did not fight back. They did not rebel. Instead, they made a choice born from desperation and grief, a choice that would haunt their bloodline for generations. Every season, the most beautiful young women in the village were chosen, dressed in silk and flowers, and sent across a frozen lake on wooden boats, not as brides, not as queens, but as offerings. The singing that followed was not celebration. It was mourning dressed up as ritual. And from the horizon, slow and inevitable, the dragon always came. He watched from the crowd, his jaw tight, his hands trembling at his sides. Among the 5 girls chosen that day was the one person whose name he had whispered in the dark like a prayer. The young knight stood frozen as the dragon circled, selected, and took her, and in that single moment, something inside him shattered beyond repair. He did not wait for permission. He did not form a plan. He simply ran, chased the beast across mountains and frozen valleys, through storms that should have killed him. When he finally reached the dragon's lair, the silence told him everything. She was already gone. And from that silence was born the most dangerous thing in the world, a man with nothing left to lose. He killed the dragon that day, his strike fueled not by courage, but by grief. The village celebrated. Songs were written. His name became a title, the Dragon Slayer, passed down like an heirloom through generations. Time has a cruel way of softening tragedy into tradition. What was once a ritual of sacrifice slowly transformed into a wedding ceremony, a romantic reenactment of the past where the danger was gone and only the drama remained. By the time his grandson Igor stood at the edge of that same frozen lake, dressed in ceremony and surrounded by cheering crowds, no one truly remembered what it had once cost. History had been washed clean, polished into something pretty. Igor was the pride of the city, the grandson of a legend, soon to be married to Miroslava, called Meera by those who loved her. The celebration was grand, almost overwhelming, and yet inside the bridal chamber, the woman at the center of it all was utterly still. Her sister Yaroslava braided her hair with practiced hands, speaking of duty and honor, but Meera's eyes were distant. When she finally spoke, her words cut through the room like cold air through an open window. She wished the dragons had never disappeared. She had dreamed her whole life of marrying a man who faced real fire, real darkness, not someone who simply inherited a name. Yaroslava's anger flared instantly, calling her foolish and childish, but Meera's quiet reply struck the deepest nerve of all. And so they both stood there, one burning with fury, one aching with longing, until Igor stepped through the door and ended it without a single word. The ceremony began at the frozen lake, ancient and beautiful and haunted by its own history. Meera was placed into the wooden boat just as the girls before her had been, dressed in white, drifting slowly across the ice while the guests sang the old song, the song about the dragon and the slayer. It rose into the cold air like smoke, familiar and mournful. And then the world answered. From somewhere beyond the tree line, beyond reason and memory, something enormous rose into the sky. The guests fell silent. The singing stopped, and the dragon, real and terrifying and ancient, dove straight toward the lake. Igor lunged for the rope, desperate and furious, pulling with everything he had. For one breathless second, it seemed like he might succeed. Then the claws closed around Meera, and she was gone. She arrived somewhere dark, damp, and ancient. Walls of stone, the smell of salt and something older, something primal. Her body ached where the claws had caught her skin, small wounds that burned with each breath. Fear moved through her in waves, but Meera had always been different from the girl everyone assumed she was. Instead of collapsing, she studied the walls. She looked for cracks, footholds, exits. She was already planning her escape when she heard something move in the shadows, a small creature, strange-eyed and wild, watching her with unsettling focus. She grabbed a rock, her pulse hammering, and raised it. Then a man's voice came, calm and unbothered, warning her to lower the stone before she made Otets angry. The creature sniffed her once, then wandered away. The voice introduced itself. His name was Armen. He was not what she expected. He spoke carefully, like a man who had learned to measure every word, every reaction. He told her, without drama and without apology, that no one escaped this place. Not ever. Meera felt the truth of it land heavily in her chest, but what struck her more was the realization that followed. Armen was not a guard. He was also a prisoner, trapped here as long as she was, perhaps longer. He noticed her wounds without being asked and passed through a crack in the wall a paste made from island herbs, quiet and practical. When she looked through the gap at him, something passed between them, brief and wordless. But Meera was not ready to trust. She needed out, and when Armen refused to help her escape, calling it impossible, she called him a coward, sealed the gap, and turned away. If she was going to survive this, she decided she would do it alone. She cut her own hair without hesitation and wove it into a rope, strand by strand, patient and fierce. It was the kind of plan born from stubbornness and courage, the kind that doesn't ask whether it will work, it simply moves forward. But the moment she was ready to climb, the dragon appeared. It filled the space with sound and heat and pure terror, and then vanished just as suddenly, leaving her breathless against the cold stone wall. She called for Armen. Silence. She was truly alone now, and for the first time, the tears came, not from fear but from the exhausting weight of having to be strong without anyone watching. She wiped them away quickly, tried the rope, and watched it snap under her weight. The wall received her fist again and again until, unexpectedly, the stone gave way and a hole appeared before her. She moved through the broken wall into the wider dark of the island, following the walls, searching for Armen, searching for anything. Then she saw it, light, pale and distant, the edge of the world. She ran toward it, and the dragon descended like a falling storm. She sprinted, ducked, pressed herself into a cave as fire grazed the walls around her. When Otets appeared, sent ahead like a hunting dog, Meera had already reached the cliff's edge. Below, the sea churned gray and violent. She stood there at the precipice, fully prepared to jump, when Armen appeared and pleaded with her to stop. But it was the next thing she noticed that changed everything. Otets, the wild, strange creature, was obeying Armen, following his voice, responding to something invisible between them. She stepped back in new fear, and her foot found nothing but air.
She fell.
And Armen fell with her. His body caught fire as he descended, not burning, but becoming, and in the open air between the cliff and the sea, he transformed. Wings erupted from his back, scales replaced skin, and the dragon that the world feared most used every inch of its enormous body to shield a single terrified girl from the impact below. When they hit the ground, Meera was untouched. Armen was not. He lay in the shallow water unmoving, the transformation reversing slowly until the man reappeared, pale and broken. Meera stood over him, breathing hard, the rock already in her hand. This was her moment. He was helpless. One strike, and she would have her revenge, her freedom, her story. Then Otets arrived, frantic and trembling, pressing its small body against its fallen master with the desperation of something that simply could not imagine the world without him. Meera's grip on the rock loosened. She set it down, and she knelt beside the man who had saved her life. She dragged him to shelter using everything she had: cloth, determination, and the kind of stubborn compassion she had never been given credit for. She built walls against the incoming storm, sealed out the rain, tended to his wounds with hands that were still shaking. That night, the temperature fell and Meera moved close to him, not from affection, not yet, but from cold and exhaustion and the simple animal need for warmth. She slept better than she had in days. In the morning, she woke to a small fire already burning and fruit placed carefully beside it, and she understood without being told that Armen had woken before her, covered her, and left quietly.
It was such a small thing.
It rearranged something inside her. When she found him and asked again to go home, his refusal came with something new, the truth. He sat with it for a long moment before he gave it to her, the story of a boy brought to this island by a father who is also a dragon. He described a childhood that was isolated but not unhappy, a son who admired his father without knowing what his father truly was. And then the day a boat arrived, and his world was destroyed in minutes. The transformation that followed came like a flood, filling him with centuries of inherited memory. Every girl brought to this island, every death, every scream. He saw his father's legacy clearly for the first time and swore with every part of himself that he would never become it. For years he held the line. Then Meera's wedding song reached the island, and the wall inside him broke completely. He told her why he couldn't take her home. Not because he didn't want to, but because the dragon inside him was not yet safe. He told her the dragon slayer would come. He told her he would not stand in the way. And then he told her the legend of this island, that the fog surrounding it could only be parted by a man guided by the love of someone who truly wanted him. Which meant Igor would only find her if she loved him. The island itself would decide. And for the first time since her arrival, Meera had no answer. So she waited. And waiting, she began to live. They moved carefully around each other at first, like people learning a new language. Armen transformed the island for her, bringing old chests of human belongings from forgotten corners, giving her comforts she hadn't realized she missed. Meera, in turn, showed him things he had never had the chance to know, the pleasure of watching flower petals drift on the wind, the warmth of an evening spent talking about nothing that mattered and everything that did. She made him a kite from scraps of cloth and asked him to help her fly it, and when it rose into the sky above the island, their hands touched and neither of them moved away. At night she heard him playing the instrument she had given him, the melody careful and searching, and she lay awake and listened and knew that something inside her had shifted permanently. He felt it too, which was why he was terrified. When his body began to change again one morning, he ran. He locked himself in the cave and fought the fire rising through his bones, using her music, using the memory of her voice, using everything he had to stay human. When he finally told her the truth about how dragons were born, that every sacrificed girl had been consumed and transformed, that the island held no graves because there were no remains, she heard it not as mythology, but as warning. He was telling her what he feared he might become. He was telling her to leave. And so the morning came when she set sail alone, Otetz watching from the shore, Armen already retreating into the cave that held the monster he could not fully outrun. Far out in the fog, Igor's ship drifted without direction, his men exhausted and afraid. Igor himself had already given up, had already decided that hope was a luxury he could no longer afford. It was the captain, Andrei, who held the course, bound by an old promise made to a dead man. When the argument reached its peak, a shape appeared in the fog, a small boat, a white sail, a woman standing upright and alive. Meera came home carrying nothing but herself and a story no one would fully believe. She asked them not to go back for the dragon. She said it was already gone. And they turned the ship toward shore. Home received her as though she had never left, almost as though leaving had never mattered. The wedding date was set again, the preparations resumed, and the city moved forward with the comfortable momentum of tradition. But her father found her one evening and sat with her quietly, and what he said did not sound like a king or a father. He told her that duty had served him poorly in love, and that he did not want that for her. He told her to choose what was real. Meera listened. She did not answer, but something in her eyes was already decided. The lake was frozen again. The boat was white again. The guests sang the old song again, and Meera sat at the center of it all, watching Igor pull the rope with steady, certain hands. And then she stood up. The rope went slack. She turned to face the crowd, her father, her sister, the city that had always expected her to be smaller than she was, and she spoke clearly. She could not marry Igor. She did not love him. She loved the dragon. The silence that followed was the loudest thing anyone had ever heard. And then, into that silence, she began to sing. Not the formal version, not the ceremony version, but the real one, from the beginning, with her whole voice and her whole heart. Far away, on a cliff above crashing waves, Armen had already made his decision. He stood at the edge with nothing left to hold on to, preparing to let go of a life that felt meaningless without her. Then her voice reached him across the water, faint at first, then undeniable, then everything. He turned back from the edge. He heard her, and the dragon answered. It came over the lake like a storm and a sunrise at once, and it took her not with violence, but with something almost gentle. Igor raised a spear, shaking with fury and wounded pride. Yaroslava screamed at him to stop. Andrei took the spear from his hands with quiet authority and put him on the ground. And Meera's father, standing at the edge of the frozen lake as his daughter disappeared into the sky, felt something unlock in his chest that had been closed for a very long time. He recognized love when it looked like this. The dragon brought her to the island's sacred place, the ground where so many had died before her. He lowered her to the stone and stood above her, vast and terrifying, smoke rising from his throat, the fire already building. He was losing himself again to everything ancient and furious and uncontrollable that lived inside him. Meera did not run. She did not scream. She raised her hands and held his enormous face between her palms, the scales burning hot beneath her fingers, and she kissed him. The fire died in his throat. The dragon went absolutely still, like something that had never in its entire ancient existence encountered this particular force and had no defense against it. She looked into his eyes, not at the monster, not at the man, but at all of it, every painful, impossible piece, and told him she loved him. Then she knelt before him, offering herself not in fear but in total and irreversible trust. The dragon lowered its head to the ground beside her. The fire was gone. What remained was something quieter and more permanent than either of them had words for. Time moved the way it does when people are finally free, gently, with warmth. They built a life on the island, small and honest, and theirs. A daughter was born, and Armen told her stories of dragons the way other fathers told stories of heroes, because in their family there was no difference between the two. He tucked her in and asked Otets to watch over her and walked out into the evening where Meera was waiting. As the last light left the sky, he transformed, not in agony, not in loss of control, but as naturally as breathing. Meera climbed onto his back without hesitation, without fear, and they rose together above the island, above the fog, above everything that had once tried to keep them apart. Below them, the frozen lake caught the last of the sunset and held it like a mirror. Above them, the sky had no end. This was never really a story about dragons. It was a story about the parts of yourself you are most afraid of and the rare, extraordinary person who looks at those parts and chooses to stay.